Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. IT will be live streaming this event at the commencement of the meeting. Can I welcome you to Rugby Borough Council Planning Committee this Wednesday, the 16th of July. I am Councillor Neil Sanderson and I am chairing this committee. The meeting is being web streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel. During the meeting, when asked to speak, please use the push button to talk on the microphone in front of you. This will allow the camera to pan in your direction and everyone to hear you. Before we begin the formal agenda, I'm obliged to read out the following notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening. If the fire alarm does sound, then could I please ask you to make your way out of the building and down the main staircase and out to the main door to the town hall and congregate in the entrance to Caldecott Park. An officer of the council will give you instructions on when it is safe to return to the building. Thank you. Moving on to the agenda, the first item of business is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of June. Do members feel that's a fair and reasonable record of that meeting? Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Pigler. I'm going to sign those minutes. Second item is to receive apologies for absence. Democratic Services. I'll get used to these buttons.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Srivastava, with Councillor Moran here as a substitute.
Right. Next we go on to declarations of interest. Are there any non-pecuniary interests? Councillor Gillies.
Yes, Chair. This site is fairly familiar to me because I got called out to an electrical fault there somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago. I can't exactly remember when it was, but it was some time ago. But I am familiar with the site.
Which site was that, Councillor Gillies?
That was item number 3. It's the R25/0030, Yardley Meadow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we now continue to the items on the agenda. If applicable, I can read the rules out for public speaking. Familiar faces here who've been here before. Again, please abide by the rules. When the alarm sounds, you've got 30 seconds to sum up, and then we will ask any questions there may be to the officer. Item 1, R240373, installation and operation of a 16.8 megawatt renewable energy generation station. Yeah, just a point on that. After item 3 has been heard, then any speakers or objectors can then move. Do you want to take item 3 first? I think that might be. Would members like me to take item 3 first? Yep, you were happy with that?
Of Woolston are of the opinion that it will be dealt with later on in the meeting. So they said that they wouldn't attend till after 6 o'clock. Now, I've just recorded that because they wanted to hear the debate and come and represent themselves. That's all.
I don't know whether that is actually feasible because we may have already done that item by 6 o'clock. So we'll take item 3.
If it's more convenient for speakers.
Then we can take, there's only 2 speakers, if both speakers are happy to wait, obviously in your gift chat, to take them in numerical order. Obviously we have to change officer, that's easy.
Right. Committee has just agreed to take them item 3 first, so we will follow in committee's agreement.
Good evening, members of the committee. This presentation is related to application R250030 located at Yardley Meadow, Streatham Road, Woolston. The application is concerning the retrospective change of use from a paddock area to allow commercial dog walking. This application has been reported to Planning Committee for determination because the proposed development has been called in during the 21-day consultation period. So turning to the site location and characteristics. The application site is located within the Greenbelt and is sited approximately 132 metres south of Woolston Village settlement boundary. The site covers an area of approximately 0.6 hectares and was formerly used as a paddock in connection with the main equestrian business of Yardley Meadow. There are residential properties located to the north, west and east of the application site, with the closest being situated on John Simpson Close, which is approximately 132 metres to the north. The paddock has an existing access track via track road from Streatham Road, which can be seen on the aerial image on the right, on the left-hand side of the red line boundary. The dog walking area is set back from Streatham Road by approximately 160 metres. The eastern section of the site partially falls within flood zones 2 and 3, with Woolston Brook running adjacent to the east of the Yardley Meadows paddocks. So with regards to the site photos, the photos on the left shows the access from the site, from Streatham Road, along with the internal access road, which then runs down to the application site. The middle photo at the bottom shows the access track then going down to the application site. The area for parking is shown on the right-hand side, along with views from within the application site to the north towards John Simpson Close. As shown on the photos on the slide, the site has already been used for dog walking field and the application is retrospective in nature. The site boundary treatment surrounding the application site and other paddocks of Yardley's Meadow comprise of a mix of wire mesh fencing and approximately 1.5 metre high timber post and rail fences. So turning to the proposal details, as already mentioned, this application is retrospective to change the use of the land from a paddock area to allow commercial dog walking. The existing area of hard standing on site will be used for parking purposes in connection with the proposed change of use. The proposal does not seek to alter the existing appearance of the application site and solely seeks permission for the proposed use as a dog walking field. The existing site is already secure due to the current equestrian use and the established boundary fencing separating the paddocks of Yardley's Meadow. There is no proposed hard standing and there are no buildings proposed to be erected as a result of this proposal. The submitted supporting planning statement further advises that the existing equestrian use of Yardley's Meadow will remain and the horses will continue to graze and exercise in the neighbouring paddocks. The proposed business operations restrict the use of the site to a single booking at any one time. The maximum number of dogs for a single booking is restricted to 6. The submitted planning statement also confirms the hours of operation to be from 8 a.m. till 3:30 p.m. Monday to Fridays and 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Saturdays. No dog walking will occur on Sundays or bank holidays. It is proposed that the site will be operated on a booking system, allowing for allocated time slots per booking. So in terms of the consultation responses, Rugby's environmental health team provided a stance of no objection, subject to conditions and informatives. The parish council objected, owing to the increased noise nuisance and antisocial behaviour due to the close proximity with the village. And Councillor Tim Willis requested that the application was determined by the committee. This was due to the level of noise and disturbance generated from the proposal and the potential negative impact on the neighbouring properties and the potential loss of privacy to neighbouring properties when the paddock is in use for the purpose of the commercial dog walking enterprise. So in terms of the third-party consultation responses, representations were received. These raised the following points: the noise generated from the operation of the site in proximity to the residential properties, noise disturbance intensified due to long hours of operation, additional traffic generated, increased number of car journeys will impact on air quality and traffic flow within Woolston Village, environmental concerns and impact on hedgerows and the bank top of Woolston Brook. There's discrepancies with the planning statement regarding the equestrian use of the site, numerous dogs on the application field at any one time, impact on the health and well-being of adjacent residents, safety concerns for nearby livestock from dogs being let loose, and the application site is too near to the village boundary. Alternative dog walking site in a more appropriate location further away from the residential properties will be preferred. Since the publish of the officer report, 2 additional letters have been received. However, the points raised were very similar to those which have just been mentioned above. So turning to the main considerations of the proposal regarding the principle of development, local plan policy GP2 states that development will be allocated and supported in accordance with the settlement hierarchy, with new development in the Greenbelt being resisted, and only where national policy in Greenbelt allows will development be permitted. Section 13, paragraph 154 of the NPPF sets out instances where certain forms of development are not deemed to be inappropriate in the Greenbelt. Paragraph 154HV states that the material change of use in land, such as changes for outdoor sport or recreation, are acceptable, providing they preserve the openness of the Greenbelt and do not conflict with the purposes of including land within it. The existing site is relatively open in appearance due to it comprising predominantly of grass paddocks, post and rail fences and gates with limited buildings. The proposal does not seek to erect any buildings or structures or make any physical changes to the appearance of the site. Access is achievable to the site for pedestrians walking from Woolston Village along Stretton Road footpath. It's considered the proposal will be appropriate to the site and the surrounding context given the nature of dog walking and the general recreational activities associated will be commonplace in the countryside. The proposed change of use will preserve the openness of the Greenbelt and would have an operational nature appropriate to the surrounding countryside character. Therefore, it's considered the proposal is compliant with local plan policy GP2 and the National Plan and Policy Framework on this aspect. Regarding the design of the proposal, policy SDC1 states that all new development will demonstrate high quality, inclusive and sustainable design, and that new development will only be supported where the proposals are of scale, density and design that responds to the character of the areas in which they are situated. Local plan policy NE3 supports new development which positively contributes to the landscape character. The existing equestrian use of Yardley Meadows is for the grazing and exercise of horses, and therefore the paddock fields are already secured by fencing and gates and have suitable access and parking facilities. As the proposed use of the application site as a dog walking field does not represent any significant functional change to its current use for horses, there are no physical alterations required to facilitate the proposal. It is therefore considered that the proposed use would not significantly impact on the rural character of the area or form intrusive or incongruous development. In addition, the location of the application site is set back from Stretton Road, which further mitigates any significant impacts. The proposal is therefore considered to comply with policy SDC1 of the local plan. With regards to the impact on neighbouring amenity, again, local plan policy SDC1 states that proposals for new development will ensure that the living conditions of existing and future neighbouring occupiers are safeguarded. Due to the nature of the proposed dog walking use and the location of the application site, the proposal is not considered to result in a significant loss of light or privacy for the surrounding properties owing to the distance between the site and the closest properties on John Simpson Close. The Council's Environmental Health Department will consult on the application and have no objection subject to conditions related to hours of operation and the submission of a management plan prior to the recommencement of any operation of the site. This condition 4 within the draft decision notice has been amended from the officer report. This now states recommencing, and it also now includes details of waste disposal which should be provided by the applicant should the application be approved. A further condition has also been imposed, only allowing 1 booking at any one time, and a maximum of 6 dogs are permitted during each booking, which further mitigates potential noise and nuisance. However, it's important to note that Environmental Health also emphasised that the grant of any planning permission for this proposal does not preclude any action being administered by Rugby Council or a third party by way of relevant environmental legislation, so should complaints about excessive noise or other site operations be received and investigated. Moving on to access, traffic and transport, the car park area is located to the south of the site entrance. There are approximately 7 parking spaces on site. There should be no more than 2 vehicles linked to the dog walking use at any one time, owing to the allocated time slots and the proposed booking system for the users. Therefore, there will be 5 spaces remaining for the equestrian business already on site. With regards to ecology, the proposal is exempt from BNG requirements and no habitats will be impacted by the proposed change of use. So moving to the planning balance and conclusion, the proposed use would introduce a new business operation to the site, as well as ensuring the existing equestrian business is retained. The proposed development accords with the environmental dimension of sustainable development. The principle of development is acceptable as a proposed change of use preserves the openness of the greenbelt. The application is deemed to be acceptable with regard to other relevant material planning considerations, such as design, impact on neighbouring properties, highway safety and parking, ecology and flood risk. Having regard to the national planning policy framework and the presumption in favour of sustainable development, it is therefore considered that the proposal will comply with policy GP1 of the local plan. As already mentioned, Environmental Health have stressed that separate regulatory powers, which means action may be taken if there are excessive issues related to noise in the future should this application be approved. Therefore, the recommendation is that this application is approved subject to the conditions and informatives set out in the draft decision notice, and the Chief Officer for Growth and Investment being given delegated authority to make minor amendments to the conditions and informatives outlined in the draft decision notice. Thank you.
When do I kick off now? Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for once, I welcome a retrospective planning application. Residents will know what to expect if granted. The residents, in my opinion, will soon become prisoners in their own homes with the noise nuisance. They will also have the fear of a negative impact on their mental health and well-being. I've listened to that and I would comment as follows. The description of the site, it doesn't include Brook Street nor Dyers Lane. It even refers to Wolvie Village. The description of the proposals on page 91, and if you would like to move your 291, are contrary to the report, the ecology report and the other report, because it states horses would continue to graze and exercise in the neighbouring paddocks when it is recommended in that report that the horses will be grazing when the dogs are not on site. That's a recommendation in that report. Moving on. Access of proposals. Principle, policy SP1 of the local plan. To secure development that improves the economic, social and environmental conditions in the area. I can't see where these are going to improve any environmental. The mess they've had and the noise and nuisance is beyond expectation. 5.1 is not factual. The design is not factual on page 95. Impacting on neighbouring properties. Policy SDC1 of the local plan will ensure that the living condition of existing and future neighbour occupiers are safeguarded. Where? Who? What are they going to be safeguarded with? All they've got to do is police the site and put up with it. Terms of privacy. No consideration is given to residents living in Brook Street or Dyers Lane. 7.5. How many dogs for a person? Will that be 3? Or will it be 2? Will it be 1? 6 and they run wild. You've got videos of it. I could carry on, but I've only got 3 minutes, and I'd like to come to this, because the residents were so concerned, they employed the director, senior engineer for the Technical Institute of Acoustics to do a report on their behalf. And you should have that report, Mr. Chairman. It was sent in. There is no mention of it in this. So,
You bring your comments to a close now.
I certainly will. Any unofficial dog walking site in an adjacent field which is also causing concern to the residents, and Yardley Meadow will be even closer to the sensitive receivers. This will be definitely another complaints issue if it goes ahead. Hopefully, common sense will prevail and the residents can have the peace and tranquility they had before this business started to operate. Thank you.
Right. Do you have any comments on those comments?
No, just for a point of clarification, Chair, there was a couple of comments mentioned. The supporting planning statement refers to it being a secure dog walking field alongside the continuation of the paddock and adjacent paddocks for grazing and exercising horses. That's in the planning statement submitted by the applicant. In terms of a document with regard to, I think it was video footage or photographic footage, that has been supplied to our environmental health team, who were obviously consultees on the application, and they have reviewed the evidence that was submitted and what they received, and I understand their views are still as standing in the recommendation, that they recommend that they do not object.
Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the public. Does Woolston warrant 2 commercial dog walking operations adjacent to each other? The report that you've read and the presentation we've heard this evening makes scant information available with regard to a 5.32 acres.
You can only refer to the application we have in front of us, not any other application or licence that may be sought in the area. Please stick to the application in front of you.
And do I start again, now that we're into my 3 minutes? Okay. The noise that generated from this field and nearby fields will far extend 6 dogs. Indeed, it is not 6 dogs, because at every hour there will be a change and there will be 12 dogs. The noise will start before 8 o'clock, because I'm sure the first booking will arrive before 8, so the 6 dogs will start to make the noise. Therefore, there needs to be a wider consideration of the noise impact on the residents of John Simpson, and indeed Dyers Lane, and indeed Stretton Road, as outlined by Mr. Wright. Another issue that has come to light, and it's only when you look at your first slide, this site is directly adjacent to Woolston Brook, and yet Section 14 says there is no flood risk. Indeed, no consultation has taken place. If consultation had taken place with the lead local flood authority and the Environment Agency, they would have been advised that that flood on the that brook on 2nd of January 24 and 6th of January 25 flooded the village, flooded the field, and would have been a risk to life, limb of animal and individual on the site. Why that doesn't appear in the report is beyond me. I ask that those be taken into account. Those issues need to be taken into account, as does the impact on the privacy. And taking John Simpson Close as an example, 14 of the 16 residents are retired. Therefore, they will be at home for most of the day and will be impacted by the noise generated at Yardley Meadow, as indeed will be those people working from home. Therefore, and particularly in the sort of temperatures we've endured over the last 3 heat waves, their windows will be shut to shut out the noise that is taking place 130 metres away, be it from 6 dogs, 12 dogs, their own dogs, and indeed any other dogs that might be in the vicinity on Stretton Road. I ask that to be considered when making your decision. I would also suggest that further detail needs to be given to the use of that field, and let's be honest, this is not the first application. It would probably be more suited to an NFM, natural flood management, and perhaps funding that is set aside in reserves for flood protection could be used so that the village of Woolston could be protected rather than its residents be inconvenienced by dogs who incidentally sound very different to horses. Your report we just said that it's basically they're one and the same. They are herd animals and dogs are pack animals. Thank you for listening, councillors.
Right then. Are there any members who wish to speak at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Just really would be good, perhaps, for some comment from planning officers, just to give colleagues some background and insight into the planning mechanics of what a paddock is and what it allows and what is being proposed here. It would help me certainly to understand currently, from a planning perspective, what is allowed. If you could, please.
Of course, through you, Chair. So the previous use was a grazing paddock for horses in relation to the equine use of the overall site and the applicant's ownership. This proposal seeks consent for a small area of the land under his ownership purely for the commercial use of dog walking. The site has very little, no change to the previous equine grazing, and it was essentially for dogs to visit the site with their owners and basically walk around the site within the confines of the previous extent of the paddock. There's existing jump features there which the horses would use, and they've remained in situ for the dogs to use if required. The draft decision notice had, I think, 3 conditions which were put forward by Environmental Health, which restricted, as said in the presentation, the hours of use and the amounts of dogs that can go at any one time, along with the request for a management plan as well.
Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not trying to tell you to do your job, but then Councillor Willis need to leave now. We're in debate, aren't we?
Yeah, the councillors are quite right. Now you've done your presentation, you have to leave, Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors.
Councillor Harrington, do you have any further comments? No?
No further comment.
Councillor Jill Simpson-Vince.
Thank you. Just a quick question. How long is a booking?
So, through you, Chair. So from the applicant, they've stated it'll be an hour at a time. So the member of the public can book it for an hour. And as advised, obviously, they can bring a maximum of 6 dogs. How often that will be, whether it's 6 dogs, I don't know. But yeah, an hour slot at a time. They will then leave. And then if it's booked hour after hour, the next person will turn up. And then there'll be, the crossover as they're leaving.
Councillor Sam Edwards.
Hi, I'd just like to pick up on what one of the speakers said about flooding, and can you just clarify, is it the case that local flooding authority haven't been featured in the report or consulted?
Yeah, so through you, Chair. I wasn't part of the consultation process originally. I appreciate the site is in flood zone, part of the site is in flood zone 2 and 3. However, I would assume because there was no direct built form or hard surfacing proposed, it was considered that there will be no substantial increase in flooding resulting from the scheme. The paddock and field will remain as it is. And I'm sure that if the field did flood naturally, then the dog walking enterprise wouldn't wouldn't persist for that period. And yeah, I would assume that was the reason, because there was no actual built form. If the whole field was to be hard surface, then it would be a different consideration, because that would then impact on flood events and additional areas being flooded as a result.
Yeah,
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just that, that the issue of noise and dogs barking has been raised numerous times by the two speakers. And could we have a legal ruling on this as to whether or not noise from dogs barking would have a bearing on giving planning permission for this business to continue?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Noise is a material consideration, as it's an effect of the scheme that comes forward, and you have to make a decision based on the evidence before you. But it's true, as stated in the report, that there are mechanisms available to neighbours that sit outside the planning system in terms of complaints to environmental health about noise. If environmental health concluded that there was a statutory nuisance, then it would be within their powers to serve a noise abatement notice, requiring that noise nuisance ceased. But the short answer to your question, it is a material consideration, but whether it's one that's sufficient to justify the refusal of an application, or whether it can be dealt with by conditions, is a matter for you.
Sorry, going back to the flooding question, the development in conclusion was below the threshold for them to be consulted, essentially. Going back to the point of the lack of development in the proposal, but it was below the threshold that the Flood Risk Agency would require.
I would point out there was a site visit that took place this afternoon. Our members did attend, and apart from the stable block, there was no other built form on the application site. Councillor Moran.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies if I've missed it in the document, but could officers just clarify the local plan status here, where this site fits within the current local plan? Would just be good to confirm.
Yeah, just for clarification, it lies in the green belt outside the settlement boundary.
I think in terms of it would be called, more likely to be called rural diversification. If there are no further questions to the officer, we'll go into debate.
Yeah, I suppose the main consideration is any potential inconvenience to the neighbouring properties, and it would be 6 dogs at any one time, and I think Councillor Willis alluded to perhaps 6, then 12, then however many. So we're dealing with a relatively known quantity here. I understand that those that attend, it's up to 6 dogs. It's not going to be necessarily 6 dogs all the time. That would be, I mean, for someone to be walking 6 dogs at a time, there must be a very enthusiastic owner of dogs, or perhaps they're a professional dog walker. So there are mitigation measures that are apparent on the face of the report. But I suppose the one thing that would interest me is if we have any data or any information, at what point does the barking of dogs become a statutory matter where environmental health would become involved?
I don't know the exact answer to that question, in all honesty. I would assume it would be continuous use. There'd have to be evidence provided to the local authority, to the environmental health team, who would then investigate accordingly and assess against their legislative powers as to whether excessive noise generated obstructs the guidance and whether action is taken. But I don't know the exact numbers.
Well, to perhaps tackle it from another angle, is environmental health concerned with a lot of noise instances to deal with connected to commercial dog walking fields?
What was environmental health comments? We'll just see what environmental health. did actually say
to read it
in
out?
terms of the report.
Yeah, I've got it. Would you like to read it out? Give me 1 second.
Just while Sam's looking for that, in reference to 6 dogs, that came from Environmental Health. I understand there is professional guidance produced by the RSPCA, and that actually refers to the potential of the maximum number of dogs that can be walked at any one time, and that refers to the maximum number being in the region of 6 dogs. And so that is where that figure has come from. It's come from the RSPCA. But I think, like Councillor Freeman mentioned, obviously it is up to 6 dogs.
Do you want me to read Environmental Health? Yeah, sorry. So Environmental Health's official response under case reference 10239, their comments are as follows. This application has been considered by Environmental Health. The proposal is to allow a paddock to be used as a dog walking area with car parking next to Stratton Road. The dogs will be walked up to the paddock. There is potential for barking dogs as the dogs are walked up the track. It is felt that the use of the site for dogs should be limited and the hours that are presently highlighted, 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Monday to Friday and 9 a.m. till 12 noon on Saturday. No use of the paddock for dog walking should occur on Sunday or bank holidays. Applicants should be reminded that action may still be taken if a noise nuisance is found, even if planning permission is obtained. It is unclear as to what the rules for management of the site will be. It is therefore recommended that a condition requiring management plans to be drawn up satisfactory to the local planning authority prior to any recommencement. Although the edge of the historic Woolston landfill site, it is felt the nature of the activities will not be affected by this. So in conclusion, Environmental Health does not object to this application subject to the following conditions and informatives. I won't read through the conditions unless you want me to, but they were related to the time restrictions, the management plan which is to be provided, and then a single booking is only allowed at one time with a maximum of 6 dogs. And the reasons for that were the interests of residential amenity and ensure the details are acceptable to the local planning authority.
Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. I should say this at the start. I've used dog walking fields, and when I got 2, I met my friends. We had 4. Barking was our dogs. All dogs are different. So for me personally, I've used them, and I thought they're very good because where I go and walk my dogs, I can't let them off the lead. So personally, for me as a resident, I would probably may look into using it in the future. But I can understand the frustration, obviously, with the noise, but are we just over-egging it? I think there will be a bit of noise, I appreciate that, but I think personally, I think the ground itself, also when you go down, I went to the track, by the way I was half an hour late, I got my times wrong, so apologies, Chair. But I went down there myself, walked down the track, and there's the actual stables at the bottom, so they can do the change over there. So, as I said, it's up to 6, and I think generally when we went it was 4. Some people just do it for 2, for 1, but it can be up to 6. And I think this is another way we could use the field, and I can't personally see an issue in it. I mean, I might be a bit biased because obviously I've got dogs, but I would propose to approve it.
So can I check, Councillor Harrington, are you moving the recommendation?
Yes, I'm moving it.
Yes, Chair.
All those in favour? Those against? That is carried unanimously. That's okay. Right.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to land south of Leamington Road in Princethorpe and is for the installation and operation of a 16.8 megawatts renewable energy generating station comprising ground-mounted photovoltaic solar arrays with associated equipment including switchgear containers, inverters, transformer units, internal access tracks, security measures, access gates, other ancillary...
Can I get you to hold a moment?
Yes,
So
sure.
The noise recedes. Right, you're okay then.
Okay. Where was I? Other ancillary infrastructure and landscaping and biodiversity enhancements. This plan shows the layout, which shows the panels in blue, which will be a maximum of 2.6 metres high. The solar farm is proposed for up to 40 years. A compound area is proposed. Oh, you can see my cursor. Compound area is proposed. I can't see it. Right click. I can't get anything now. Sorry. Never mind.
Yeah, I think
It's there.
Yeah,
The compound area is proposed there, next to the access track through the site, and then the transformers are proposed along the access track next to the panels. The proposals also include the upgrading of the existing access in the northwest corner and a temporary construction access in the northeast. Landscaping will be provided to the north of the site and to the site boundaries, and trees and hedgerows will be retained. Here are some examples of the proposals with the panels, examples of the containers and one of the transformer units. These are photos showing the site. The top photograph is from the entrance looking out, the existing entrance looking out across the site. The bottom photograph is from the far end of the site, and you can just about see the church at Princethorpe College in the distance here. The key issues to assess with the application are the principle of the development, both in the Greenbelt and in terms of agricultural land, the design and appearance, landscape and visual impact, natural environment, and highways and transport. In terms of the principle of development in the Greenbelt, the site is considered to constitute grey belt land in accordance with the NPPF, and this is land which does not strongly contribute to the Greenbelt purposes to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, prevent neighbouring towns from merging, or preserve the setting and special character of historic towns. The development of grey belt land is considered appropriate in principle if it would not fundamentally undermine the purposes taken together of the remaining greenbelt land across the area of the plan. There's a demonstrable unmet need for the type of development which is proposed, and the development would be in a sustainable location. There are also golden rules for grey belt development, but that's housing, so is not applicable in this case. As set out in a lot more detail in the agenda, the proposals are considered to comply with these requirements, so are considered acceptable in principle within the Greenbelt. In terms of agricultural land, 61.5% of the site does comprise the best and most versatile land, which is grades 2 and 3A. The applicants have provided a sequential site assessment which looked at other suitable sites for the development within the area, and it did not identify any sites which would be sequentially preferable to this one. In addition, the sites that were considered in the assessment could also include best and most versatile agricultural land, and the land will also retain its agricultural use for sheep grazing during the lifetime of the development and will revert to agricultural use after the lifetime of the development. And the use of BMV land is considered acceptable in accordance with SDC 8. I've also just remembered I was meant to say we've had another objection which is detailed on the addendum. Sorry about that. In terms of design and appearance, the trees and hedgerows that are existing within and around the site are to be retained to a minimum of 3 metres in height. The security fencing is proposed 2.5 metres high, and that will be inside of the existing hedgerows and round the area of the panels. The panels will be mounted on frames of up to 2.6 metres high, and the equipment and buildings will be up to 3 metres high. The tallest part of the proposals will be CCTV columns, which will be 4.5 metres, but a slimline appearance. The long-distance views of the site are screened by topography and by existing landscaping, and the design is considered acceptable and will not have an adverse impact on the character of the area. The proposals include additional woodland, tree and hedgerow planting and grassland. The landscape officer does not object to this, subject to additional planting being provided within the site to screen views from the public right-of-way crossing the site, which is there, and from other public rights-of-way close to the site. And this can be landscaping can be accommodated within the site and is controlled by a condition and also referred to in an informative. The closest heritage assets to the site are the Church of Our Lady and All Angels at Princethorpe College, which is a Grade 2 star listed building, and the Wappenbury Conservation Area, which is within Warwick District. The development will not harm the significance or special interest of these assets. The county archaeologist initially commented on the application and requested a predetermination assessment. However, the applicant confirmed that if there were archaeological deposits that needed to be retained in situ, they could look to implement no-dig construction and, if necessary, look to reposition elements of the proposals. The county archaeologist accepted this subject to a condition and has no objection to the proposals. In relation to the natural environment, the site is used by bats and birds, including breeding birds. However, the hedgerows and trees are to be retained, which will retain the majority of this habitat. The ground is also used by skylarks, and that will be affected. Skylark mitigation plots are to be proposed on nearby agricultural land, as can be shown on this plan here, and that's going to be controlled by a Section 106 agreement. A 10% biodiversity net gain is required. And the proposals are expected to lead to gains of 57 area units, which is 123.5% roughly, and 4.63 hedgerow units, which is a gain of 35.13%. The biodiversity scheme needs to be maintained for 30 years, and this can be controlled by a condition and the payment of a monitoring contribution. This will be secured by the legal agreement. On this basis, there's been no objection from the county ecologist, subject to conditions and the legal agreement. In relation to highways and transport, the proposals will use and improve the existing access in the northwest of the site, with a temporary construction access proposed in the northeast. The access track is proposed through the centre of the site. Following comments from the Highway Authority, additional information and a road safety audit were provided. A condition is proposed which requires the submission of a construction traffic management plan, which requires routing and timing of construction traffic to be agreed. On this basis, no objection was raised by the Highway Authority. The public footpath runs through the centre of the site and will be retained on the current alignment within the landscaped area. As set out on the agenda, the developments considered acceptable in relation to drainage, noise and vibration, health impact assessment, airport flight paths, and the pipeline which crosses the north of the site, subject to the conditions on the agenda. As set out on the agenda, a Section 106 agreement will be used to secure off-site skylark mitigation, the monitoring of the on-site habitats for the required 30-year period, and the monitoring fee. As the development is for a solar farm, there is no requirement for community infrastructure levy contributions. It's considered the proposals comply with the development plan, and no material considerations have been identified to indicate the development should not be approved, and the development complies with the local plan and the MPPF. The proposals will lead to economic benefits, such as investment in the borough and construction jobs. It will retain the existing right-of-way through the site, and it will deliver renewable energy, contributing to targets for renewable energy and contribute to addressing the climate emergency declared by the Council. On this basis, approval is recommended, subject to conditions and informatives as set out in the draft decision, but also as revised by the addendum, and the completion of the Section 106 legal agreement. The Chief Officer for Growth and Investment should be given delegated authority to make minor amendments to the conditions and informatives if required, and in consultation with the Chair to negotiate and agree the detailed terms of the legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Do members have any technical points they would like to raise with the officer? Right, who was first? Toby Lyons.
Thank you for the report. Thorough as always, thank you for that. This is primarily coming through because it's there to create green energy, but it is in a greenfield area. Now, we had one of these that came through previously for a solar farm, and I had the same question there as I have now. What is below these things is concrete. There's a load of concrete that's going to be put into the ground, which, if this was ceased to be in use now or in 40 years' time, would have to be removed. So the question I had is there anything in there? There's mention within the the archaeological aspect, but there hasn't been anything there I can see that says they are going to reduce the amount of concrete they're going to put in the ground. Concrete being one of the major contributions to CO2, which is completely against the purpose of this site. If I can add to that, previously we added informative in order to encourage the developer to add in that green thinking into their construction.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. So your real question is what is the overall carbon footprint of the site, including the installation?
Particularly the construction and installation, and then can we put an informative in to encourage the developer to reduce the amount of concrete they put on the ground?
Yeah, through you, Chair. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head the precise carbon footprint of the development. I know that the hard surface is kept to a minimum to the area where the supports are needed for the panels, and I know they'd looked in relation to the archaeology as where instead of having foundations they could look at having sort of raft platforms for the framework to sit on. I don't know which of those solutions would have more or less impact in terms of the concrete, in terms of construction. What we could do, as you suggested, we could put an informative on and we could ask them to consider that when they are designing that part of the scheme.
That seems a reasonable response. Councillor Picker, I think you indicated next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Karen, for the detailed report. I just have a couple of slight technical questions in relation to paragraph 9.13 and 9.14 on the biodiversity monitoring. So the monitoring period is for 30 years, but the application we're being asked to consider today is a 40-year temporary grant of permission. Now, I'm assuming that that's because one piece of legislation says that the monitoring must be for 30 years. Is there any mechanism by which committee could perhaps extend that monitoring for the lifespan of the application, especially considering it's temporary? And I did have a second question, but I cannot remember it, so I'll pause there and let you answer.
Councillor Moran.
Thank you, Chair. I am, in reading this, I'm bizarrely drawn to the monitoring fee element and calculation, because, as has been highlighted, there's potentially ecological and habitat impact. And you know, straight off, the figure 42,935 to monitor a 5-hectare site for 30 years, I've got real concerns. So my question is, where did that figure of 42,935 come from? And well, that's the first question. And I guess in second, if ultimately it's a cost to the relevant planning authority, who knows what will be relevant in 25 plus years' time, but it seems strange that it's not, you know, prorated or market tested in the years to come, as opposed to banking a fixed fee now for the next 30 years. That seems to be storing up a bit of a liability. So can we get some understanding of where the 42,935 has come from?
Through you, Chair, I'll try and answer both sets of questions. So the 30-year requirement for biodiversity net gain is enshrined in legislation and is set out by the government for all sites where we have the biodiversity net gain. I think to extend the monitoring period and to require a greater fee on something which isn't required by our legislation or policy possibly won't meet the SIL test in that it's not necessarily justified to ask for it. I would hope by 30 years that the habitats will be sufficiently established to continue on their own, which I think is why 30 years is enshrined in the legislation, to give habitats time to develop. The £42,000 contribution came from the county ecologist based on the size of the site and habitats that are going to be created on there, how often they would want to visit those and make an assessment of whether it's being dealt with properly, and they have monitoring fees that they charge, which I think we implement through a service level agreement with them. What was the rest of the question?
Yes, just to add to that, for Councillor Brown's benefit, yeah, we have agreed that because we don't have an in-house ecology team, the Warwickshire County Council will do the monitoring on our behalf, but the charge is then to the developer, and those figures have all been calculated by the county ecologist, what they consider is the appropriate fee for this particular site, and it will vary from site to site, and those fees will be. I'm fairly certain it is pro rata, it's index linked in terms of the rate. I think that's worked out in there, but don't hold me to that. I've not got the information in front of me, but I am aware of a detailed spreadsheet that they have sent us, and it has been something we're ensuring that they do the monitoring, because we can charge for the monitoring, because I know it's a new thing for a lot of authorities now, but we are now including it in legal agreements to ensure that we aren't, as you said, lumbered with this financial burden in it over a 30-year period. It is the developers that do pay it.
Thank you. I think Councillor Gillies indicated a technical question.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I did note that in the pictures on display that we've got cereal crops growing in the field, and we've got a report stating that the grassed area under the proposal, under the PV panels, would be to graze sheep. Now, as the farmer, does he breed sheep? Is he going to take up breeding sheep, or is he going to rent it out to somebody who's going to graze their sheep under the panels? The other thing is we've got no data as regarding crop loss. Now, every farmer I know will tell you exactly what they've cropped off each field, and it'd be a really good indicator of how much crop in terms of wheat, or cereal crops, barley, or root crops, things like potatoes, to give us some idea of the amount of food that will be lost over the next 40 years. So that would be very, very useful, because then we could compare, what we're getting in energy to what we're losing in food.
I don't think there's an agricultural report, is there?
Can I come back on a few points? Going back to the point on the monitoring fee, the amount is based on the ecologists visiting 2.5 days per year, and then another visit for 1.25 days per year and administration, and it also includes a increase for inflation over the 30-year period in that original fee. In terms of the crops and whether the farmer owns his own sheep, I have no idea. Obviously, that's what they are proposing as part of their application. Whether they're planning to buy sheep, rent it out, what I don't know, and I don't have that information. Sorry.
Councillor Jill Simpson-Vince, this is again a technical point, is it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for a really detailed report. Just a couple of concerns that aren't sort of covered in here. The Leamington Road floods. So whilst I appreciate these fields aren't considered high risk on flood, the road does flood, and the entrance to this site is sort of between. We've got schools in very close proximity. There was some. Well, yeah, is there a consideration, has there been a consideration with this in terms of access about HGVs and lorries coming in and out when the road is going to be flooded from one direction whenever there is heavy rainfall. It's usually so bad the primary school has to close. So we don't really want HGVs driving through it and causing more problems. And also, there's talking here about traffic management and working around school hours, but obviously with two schools with slightly different timings, I just wonder how feasibly that's going to work and whether that's already being factored into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, in terms of the flooding, no objection was received from the Flood Risk Authority or comments from the Environment Agency. In terms of HGV traffic and so on, it's a 7-month construction period. I would like to think people would use their common sense, and if they couldn't get there for flooding reasons, they wouldn't get there that day. It's not like it's going to be a business that had to have HGV traffic there every day for the lifetime of that business. It's for that short construction programme. After that, in terms of traffic, it will be 1 car or van or 2 cars or vans a week, which again, I guess they would adjust as necessary. In terms of the school traffic, the County Council are aware of the schools in the area, and that's why they've asked to have construction timing looked at so they can take that into consideration. And I think that's something they've specifically asked because of that situation. It's not something I've always had them put in their construction traffic management plan. It is because they are aware of that and want to avoid that becoming an issue.
Councillor Harrington, did you have a technical point, or are you happy to lead into debate?
Just one very quick technical point. On the site itself, how close is it to the grid? So I must have missed it in the report, so if I have missed it, I do apologise, but that would give me some good indication of the location, why we're locating it there.
Yeah, that's one of the key reasons why they've chosen this site, because there are actually, let me find my arrow again, there are actually power lines at this edge of the site, so they can make the grid connection without having to get a cable run a long distance.
Okay, can now move it into debate. Councillor Moran, would you like to start?
Okay, thank you. Very efficiently moved on. I'll try and perhaps a technical query into a discussion point. I think I've got quite some significant development experience. I don't think I've seen something that pays down now for a 30-year liability. For a 5-hectare site, I've got grave concerns as to that, and I think it's important that that habitat monitoring is done really well. So, if the point of clarification I was going to make was to clarify, you talked about an SLA with the county ecologist. Are we saying categorically that liability, that commitment is done on a back-to-back legal basis, so that this planning authority is not left, holding the baby in any way? But my debating point then, let's say, is can we vary, can we discuss this to the point that it's a commitment for monitoring of a prescribed amount for maybe 5 years, and then at which point the matter is reviewed and it's actually market tested so that it's done to whatever the rates are in 5 years' time?
These temporary applications anyway.
I mean, the requirement to monitor the BNG for 30 years is within the legislation and falls on the local planning authority.
Sorry, I'm not talking about the BNG, I'm talking about the habitat monitoring fee.
That is the BNG.
But in terms of going forward then, in terms of that liability over the next 30 years,
that liability would fall to the council under the legislation, whether we had the fee or not. The fee is to allow us to do that monitoring.
Right, but so either the applicant is required to pay something.
The applicant is required to pay us the 42,000 to allow us to allow us, our contractors, the county council, to do that monitoring.
I do understand that. My question though is the liability back to back with whoever is the off-site ecologist. However, can we review it so that it's in 5 years' time, or whatever, it is reassessed for what the appropriate fee would be at that time?
In terms of the monitoring fees, as I said, this is well, as the officers mentioned, is that under the Environment Act, the liability falls to us as an authority. But obviously, we've taken the steps that the legislation also says that we can also then charge a monitoring fee rate. Members, depends how fine a detail you looked at, but in the council report that went on our fees and charging schedule, there was reference to it. We didn't know the agreed figures at the time, but we said that we as an authority would charge applicants and developers for it. So we now have a charging schedule agreed with the county council. That does take account of, I've just been looking at it, that does take account of inflation over the basically the figures they've quoted are based over a 10-year average of inflation, which was come out I think at 4.04%. So that's been built into the cost. And that in itself, you know, those figures have been calculated by the county. Now, the service level agreement that we have with the county it's a rolling one. It's agreed. That is one that we pay into every year. Now, in terms of obviously ensuring that the monitoring keeps going, we actually now, along with about another 100 councils in the country, have actually purchased a piece of software. It's very AI focused. It's very clever to use. And it actually works a lot of all this out for us. So we know exactly what the BNG is, and then we can also fit into that the charging. Because obviously the other difficulty is that we also become the enforcing authority. If the county goes out and does the monitoring and then it finds out that something hasn't been done as it should have been done, it then falls to us to do that enforcing. But we have now this piece of software that actually at the moment has been government funded. And that in itself is going to help us in that process. So I think we've got it as robust as we can, but obviously I hear what you're saying, and it may be that those fees do get reviewed in due course, but I think at the moment this is what we've got before us, and these are the figures that the county ecologists have worked out for us using their quite complicated matrix that they do.
Councillor Freeman.
I've read the report with interest because it's the first time I've seen a solar farm application. But the concern I have is about the access across the centre of the site that's open to the public. There's going to be a lot of quite vulnerable and dangerous equipment on that site. How are we going to separate public from that equipment?
Through you, Chair. So I'm on the wrong mouse. There is the public footpath through the middle of the site. Fencing is proposed around the area of the solar panels, so the people walking will be confronted by the 2.5 metre high fence if they were trying to get into the panels. There's also, that will be one of the areas where they're looking to provide the landscaping in this area. So if you see on the southern side of that middle section, we've got a hedgerow going in there. I think there's already a hedgerow on the other side so that it will provide the separation away from the panels.
Okay, and there's proposed to be sheep on there. How are we going to manage the issue with sheep being equally destructive or potentially destructive?
I mean, in terms of grazing sheep under solar panels is something that happens fairly often. I've seen it happen. I don't think the sheep are that bothered. They sometimes use them as shelter, but I guess they must construct them in a sheep-proof way.
Well, they have been known to escape from fields. We see that around Newbold and Pilton all the time.
They're probably less likely to escape with a 2.5 metre fence.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, let's bring this to a close now. Can we stay in debate and move this on, please, to a vote?
Thank you, Chair, and sort of respectfully, so this is only my second planning committee meeting in this chamber, so I appreciate every council works a bit differently, but the point I was trying to make wasn't really answered. I understand the process, you know, it's what I do. My point is, as an individual councillor, I'm not comfortable with fixing a fee. I understand why the developer, I understand clearly why they want to fix their costs. My point is, it seems an undue potential burden on the public purse for what is clearly a commercial activity. We can discuss the merits separately, but is there a legal mechanism that we can propose whereby the cost of monitoring would be fixed for, let's say, 5 years, and thereafter would be whatever the market cost is?
And the short answer is I don't know. on that question, because this is new legislation that we're just getting to grips with as a council ourselves. We would have to take our own legal advice on that in terms of whether we actually can do that and whether legally we can actually do that in terms of the legislation that has the requirements in connection with monitoring. Because the big question is whether or not, if we deviate away from that, will it then be still compliant? And obviously at the moment, it's enshrined within the Environment Act. So the short answer is I can't give that confidence to members that we, after a 5 or 10 year period, can change those figures. They've been based on a 30-year calculation that's been done. But I understand where you're coming from on that point. I don't know if our legal officer's got any further they can add on that. I mean, it's all new legislation.
Only to say monitoring fees are quite common in Section 106 agreements, and they're normally calculated. There's some robust calculations that sit behind them, because the county council itself won't want to be out of pocket on the monitoring, and that's why they build in measures for inflation. Clearly, there's some risk for both parties there, because nobody can predict with certainty, how those prices will index over time. But that has to be balanced with a need for certainty for the applicant at the outset over the costs of the scheme, and in terms of whether that scheme is viable. I think if members had concerns over how that calculation was reached, because if you are minded to grant, the application will go off and a Section 106 agreement will have to be put in place before the permission is granted. So if you wanted to use that time to receive some more information about the calculation and the exact drafting of the 106, I'm sure that can be discussed with members in the intervening period between the decision tonight and the issue of the permission.
Thank you for that information. Now, I'm mindful there are other items to be discussed as well this evening, so I'll move this item from the chair. Do we have a second?
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, Chair.
Subject to condition. Doing informative, wasn't it?
The speakers as well, Chair.
Yeah, there was an added work. I mean, obviously, if the council is happy, officers can agree. I can try and remember. I can't recall which solar farm it was that we did it on before, but I do remember having a discussion about it before, about the concrete construction or whatever, and the informative there. So we can certainly put that on, and officers can draft that. So that's subject to that. I'm conscious seems to be other people.
Councillor Gillies.
Sorry about that. We suddenly moved from debate straight into the vote. So I've got to raise a couple of issues here, because obviously we're getting a lot of these solar farms developed around the borough, and it would be a really good idea to update us in an application such as this on how many acreages we're covering. Because I've already mentioned once tonight about information on how much food will be lost by putting solar farms on productive farmland. And I've just done a quick rough calculation of how many loaves of bread could be lost from solar farms. This is important, because not so many weeks ago we were looking at possibly a third world war, so we've got to be thinking in terms of, providing food for our communities. And I reckon somewhere between 7 and 11 million loaves of bread could be lost over that period of time. It's only a simple calculation. And the information of what food has been produced on that land over the last decade could be given to you by the farmer himself. We need that information. It's not all going to be one-sided, so we know exactly that, at night time, the solar farm doesn't produce any electricity whatsoever. And even in the winter months, where there's very few hours of darkness and it's overcast.
If you want to move refusal of this application, you can. But please keep to the application.
Yes.
And not generalising on other subjects.
I am talking exactly about this issue. And this is what the debate is about, talking about all the issues regarding an application. Because when you only get just a certain amount of information, you're not able to make a proper decision unless you've got all of the information. This is what it's about. So, I'd like to see a little bit more information. And a lot of people out there that have a real pride in the countryside think the same.
Councillor, yes, are you moving refusal or asking for a deferral? Which?
Well, I'm just hoping that other I'm just hoping that other councillors might support me. So, yes, in that case, yes, I will move refusal.
Tell us what grounds you're putting forward.
Loss of habitat and loss of food.
Okay. Councillor Pickering.
I have great sympathy for Councillor Gillius's comments. I think the one thing that I would say is that if the farmland is not going to be used for crop growing, which we have no evidence that it is currently, then there's no mechanism by which we can require that. So I'm not 100% convinced I agree with Councillor Gillius's assessment. The point I was going to make is if Councillor Lawrence needs a seconder for his informative, I'm happy to second that.
Yeah. Jill Simpson-Fitz.
Thank you. The problem I have with this one is that, I mean, you've said that the access to the grid is through the pylons. There's a line of pylons, and they go all across the countryside. And normally with solar farms, we try and keep them away from residential. This is quite close to Princethorpe. It's quite close to 2 schools. And I mean, I know they said they couldn't find anywhere else, but I'm just like, if you had to pick some fields, those ones just seem like they're in the wrong place. I just think it's too close to the village, so I will be seconding Councillor Gillius's refusal.
Councillor Sam Edwards.
So, listening to what different people have said, I think there is a lot of uncertainty regarding certain pieces of information. Whilst I'm not suggesting outright refusal, I'd like to propose a deferment for more information regarding what Councillor Moran was referring to. Because once we made a decision, then I know the legal advisor said you could have discussion further, but that decision has been made then. And also Councillor Gillius with it raising about food. Can we get more information about how much energy is going to be lost?
If we're going for a deferment, then it has to be on a specific issue, which would then be brought back to the next committee meeting. So we have to be clear what we are deferring for.
Okay, can it be on the issue that Councillor Moran has raised?
I mean, we can seek further clarification, but I mean, I don't know how much more information I'll be able to provide at this stage, but we can, you know, if that was the decision of committee, I can ask the county council further information about the calculations of the actual monitoring fees or whatever. But obviously, you know, I understand this is actually a unilateral undertaking that is being submitted, so you know, members wouldn't get the opportunity to see the drafting of the legal agreement again. But if that's what members chose, you know, we could. But obviously, you know, as far as I'm aware, it has come from a robust source.
Councillor Freeman.
On the question of Councillor Moran's concerns about future costs, is this not something that should be properly delegated to a suitably qualified officer?
I think it will probably come under the grounds of what will be decided under delegated, yes.
At the moment, I don't think there's anything else I can add to that. To be fair, you know, the monitoring fees are what has been set by the county council. That's based on that factors in inflation. Obviously, we have the 30-year period. I know that they've taken a 10-year average when calculating that in terms of inflation, which I believe I said it was about just over 4%. So that's been factored into that cost already. You know, and there's a robust formula that they actually use to calculate all that. So I think it's obviously specifics haven't been provided before members in front of this, but obviously, you know, it's normally the matter that is delegated to officers, and we would, you know, we've looked at, and then obviously we've come up with the figure. If we didn't, you know, if we were uncomfortable with the figure that had been prepared by the county council, then obviously we would challenge that before we brought it to members. But obviously we're as officers, you know, are comfortable with the information provided. And obviously, yeah, likewise, we also don't want to ensure, you want to protect our own interests and make sure that the developer does pay what they should be paying for monitoring. But obviously, it's come from the experts at the county when calculating the fee.
Councillor Luke Russell.
Thank you, Chair. So I've listened to the debate, read the report. My initial reservation on this was about impact on Greenbelt, and I know that had come up in some of the objections. I think the report's quite clearly established that actually it's grey belt, which is something we're all going to need to get our heads round and learn about over the coming months. So that's allayed that reservation for me. I think the renewable energy benefit here is something that's quite important to me. I think it's quite key. A very rudimentary online search of a 16.8 megawatt solar farm. I think it powers maybe 4,000 homes, I think, roughly. So I can't see any real reason from my point of view to refuse this, so I will move approval. Thank you.
Councillor Moran.
Sorry, thank you. Perhaps I just need to be sort of more specific. I categorically disagree with the fee proposed. It's not sufficient. And if the calculation has been that we're looking at inflation doesn't equal building costs or survey costs inflation. As someone who's paid them for the last 10 plus years, they don't go up by 4%. And I think, for me, if we're going to, again, to welcome Councillor Edwards' suggestion for a deferment, my proposal would be to go back, seek a fixed, shorter, finite period to cover costs, and then effectively a unilateral undertaking by the developer to undertake the costs for the duration of the scheme.
Councillor Picker, did you indicate it? And a proposal for informative, based on the carbon footprint of the proposal. Councillor Gillies.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind withdrawing my proposal for refusal. If we went for a deferment, I haven't got a problem with that, because I want to see more information. It's totally lopsided in the way of producing green energy. And that green energy, I can tell you, on my solar system at my house, on lovely sunny days, I produce nearly 30 kilowatts a day. On a dark day, I might get 2 kilowatts. Exactly the same thing up there in proportion. So it's not producing all that every day, only on good days. So and it's the loss of food long term. 40 years is a long time, you know. When I had black hair then, and no wrinkles, about that. So I'd like to I'll take my proposal for refusal back, and I'm going to go with deferment.
Councillor Freeman.
I usually have problems with deferments, simply because you can end up trying to cover areas which are well beyond the capability of this committee or any other to assess. I have no expertise whatsoever on predicting what the food loss on a particular site would be over 40 years. There'll be all sorts of mitigating factors. Technology may change. And then we can tempt ourselves in getting further information. The reason I'm seconding this is I think that on the face of it, this application is capable of being approved. I don't want to introduce lots of other factors which will simply complicate it to no added value.
I can see where you're coming from, Councillor Freeman. I mean, at the moment, farmers are having their problems to grow anything because of the current temperatures and heat waves that we're going through. Now that's going to affect food growth anyway.
Sorry, Chair, could I just make one very important point? Our local plan. Our local plan is asking us to put PV panels on every new house. Every new house gets new PV panels, therefore you don't need giant solar farms, you see, because there'll be energy self...
With respect to Councillor Gillies, the new local plan has yet to be approved. Councillor Moran, and I really do need to start winding this up.
Thank you, Chair. Just really to echo what Councillor Russell said, that again got into it, got my head around. I'm supportive of the principle. That's not in doubt. Equally, I'm clear that a commercial developer should absolutely pay the appropriate figure, and to do the bare minimum, which this section 106 looks like the bare minimum in terms of what it sets out. So for me, to reiterate, defer, come back, clarify the commitment to ongoing costs as an assessment after a couple of years would be my preference. The principle is great. We're committing to something for the next 30 or 40 years. It's important it's just done right at the start for me.
Just a couple of points through you, Chair. Firstly, the 519 of the report does deal with the sequential test in relation to best and most versatile agricultural land, so there is some hoops that the applicants had to go through in terms of justifying use of that land as opposed to any other sites. And secondly, in relation to monitoring, it's worth noting that that fee will be applied. It will be based on a formula and applied across the county in terms of those monitoring fees, and will have been adopted by the county council. So you need to think carefully about whether any reasons have been presented to you tonight that actually demonstrates that that figure is erroneous, other than supposition. So I think if deferral is a possibility, but you'd have to think exactly about what you're asking the applicant to provide during the intervening period. Because clearly there's a general obligation to deal with matters as expediently as possible and not to cause delay in the system without justification. So I think if members are minded to defer, I think you need to be very, very specific about what you want officers or the applicant to come back with in terms of further information. And the other option is to make your in-principle resolution tonight, delegate the settlement of the Section 106 to officers with a specific instruction to look at the monitoring and come back to you and explain how that's been reached before the 106 is finalised and the permission granted, which may be a smoother and more expedient way of dealing with it than deferral, which means that it has to come back to another committee.
Councillor Moran.
Look, thank you, but look, with respect, it's not supposition. It's based on my experience that I think as individual councillors we're supposed to bring to this. And all I'm saying, just really quite simply, is that if you're saying Warwickshire County Council sign up to 30-plus year agreements all across the county, then I'm stunned because of that potential liability. My point is simply, it would be good to come back as a point of fact that the developer does undertake to cover the costs, whatever those costs are, beyond a particular finite period. So I'm trying to be quite specific as to how this has been looked at, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, the other option is to speak to the applicant in the intervening period and see whether we can agree a review mechanism in the agreement or the unilateral undertaking. So the decision in principle could still be made tonight with officers' delegated authority to go and negotiate with the applicant over that clause.
Yeah, I think, through you, Chair, just sort of thinking this through, is that obviously the wording, I suppose, in terms of the actual legal agreement is obviously that's generally been delegated to officers. It's not something we then debate in this chamber. If members were minded or happy with the principle, but obviously wanted a review mechanism in, which is not, that's quite common in legal agreements, particularly in connection with, provision of 106 obligations in terms of right across the board to ensure that, like you say, perhaps 5 years down the line or whatever, there's a review mechanism there potentially, in case we make sure we don't miss out on valuable affordable housing. So what members may want to give consideration to is that if they're happy to approve it, but then we look at, as part of the legal agreement, is reviewing that before obviously issuing the decision, delegated to officers to look at putting in a review mechanism at various periods. Obviously 5 years was mentioned, it's sort of 5, 10, 15, where there's a review mechanism put in. Obviously if that isn't, if they do not agree to sign up to that, then we may then obviously then have to bring the application back with the evidence that we've got to say, well, this is what we've got. But it's whether or not, members would feel comfortable enough with officers doing that on their behalf without it coming back to committee once, obviously, because obviously I appreciate once the decision is made, it is. But obviously it would be subject to an agreement. I need to check with the officer behind me whether that's possible because of the nature of the legal agreement that they're intending to submit.
Councillor Picker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Richard. I think you've sort of summed up where I was heading, because I think we're getting into a technical discussion, a very reasonable and fair technical discussion about matters that are not entirely relevant to this specific application, in that it appears to be the underlying mechanisms that all of these applications will be committing to, that we've perhaps got some concerns over. My recollection, having chaired the committee in the past, is that Section 106 agreements can be brought back to the chair for sign-off. So could we perhaps, if members are satisfied, perhaps do that? I'm sure Councillor Sanderson has heard and made copious notes on the concerns that have been raised this evening. And then perhaps there's a wider conversation to have as a local authority with our partners in Warwickshire County Council, and perhaps even with partners in government if it's the underlying statute that's the issue, as far as these mechanisms go. But I haven't heard anything in relation to this specific application that would give me grounds for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Picker. Yeah, I think members can, if they wish, support the application in principle, and then, as the officers have suggested, they can go and talk to the applicant regarding best way to make this work in terms of possibly a 5-year review period, those sorts of things we've discussed well tonight. If the applicant's not happy with that, then it would have to come back to this committee in terms of the Section 106 agreement, wouldn't it?
Can I just clarify the officer whether or not that's, based on discussions you've had today and the type of agreement they're looking at submitting, whether that's actually feasible?
Yes, because although they're submitting a unilateral undertaking rather than a Section 106 signed by both parties, our legal advisors are looking at it, so we can ask them, we can tell them that if that's what you resolve, that we want a 5-year review mechanism input into that agreement, and we can ask them to advise on how that's worked best. And then if the applicants aren't happy to do that, then we could bring it back, but I would hope they would be. So it would sort of add to the recommendation, so it would be part of the given delegated authority to add a 5-year review mechanism to the, negotiate that as part of the unilateral undertaking.
No, thank you for that. I have also made a separate note to actually, because this is going to happen more, it will happen more and more now with sites with BNG, to actually look at and actually discuss with the county further about a review mechanism. And I think it goes wider than this authority. It goes right across Warwickshire, and I will discuss it with my counterparts as well, because I think it's a very valid point that's been made.
Okay, if members are content with that, then can we move to the vote?
Proposed and seconded on based on that. We've got so many on the table.
Proposal to grant with the informative, subject to the review.
So we have a proposal to grant with the informative and the instructions to the officers in terms of Section 106. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah.
All those in favour, please show.
Chair, for the public, you'll need to tell them what the vote was.
The members of the public have heard the vote is approval, subject to the informatives and looking at the Section 106 agreement. Yeah, that's R240474, erection of 11 residential dwellings with garages and associated parking with landscaping and alterations to the existing property. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is application R240474 at 25 Barbie Lane for the erection of 11... Sorry, I'll start again. This is application R240474 at 25 Barbie Lane for the erection of 11 residential dwellings with garages and associated parking with landscape and alterations to the existing property on the site. This application has been reported to the Planning Committee in accordance with paragraph 5.23a, request by councillors of the scheme of delegation. So moving to the site location. The site is located within Hillmorton, within the settlement boundary of Rugby Town. It comprises the existing dwelling of number 25, which has been neglected for a period of time, and the associated land under its ownership, along with a garden area previously under the ownership of number 23 Barbie Lane, which now forms the overall application site. The site area covers a total of 7,528 metres squared. To the south and east of the application site are agricultural fields designated as countryside land and part of the Rainsbrook Valley. To the west of the application site is residential built form, including the linear format of development on Westwood Road. To the north are other properties on Barbie Lane, and to the northeast is the cul-de-sac of Fellows Way. It is important to note that a section of this application site under consideration tonight contains an outline permission for 5 dwellings under reference number R210713, which was allowed at appeal. Number 25 itself comprises of facing brickwork with weatherboarding at part at first floor level. There was previously a variety of ancillary buildings associated with the occupation of number 25, however these have now been demolished. So to put some context as to the site, on the left shows the aerial image of the application site, along with the submitted site location plan. On the right, it shows, on the top right corner, it shows the development which borders the northeast on Fellows Way, and on the bottom right includes the adjacent linear format development on Westwood Road. Some site photos, got ones of the existing property, the views to the Rainsbrook Valley to the south, and then the access along with another view across the site in the bottom left corner. So moving to the proposal details, as mentioned, it's for the erection of 11 dwellings with garages and off-street parking along with landscaping. The existing property will remain with proposed elevational changes in order to incorporate it within the proposed street scene. The vehicular access from Barbie Lane is proposed to be taken from the existing access serving number 25. However, this is to be enlarged in order to accommodate the scale of the proposal. The internal road within the site will then run eastwards to a hammerhead feature on the eastern side, and there'll be footpath provision around the perimeter of the internal state road. The proposed dwellings will all be market dwellings comprising of 3 3-bedroom properties and 8 4-bedroom dwellings. A mixture of brick, render and cladded panels are proposed throughout the site. Amended plans have been submitted throughout the determination period, through the assessment period, which has reduced the overall massing of the development on the site and provided elevational changes where requested. So to put context to the proposal, as you've seen on the first slide, on the left is the proposed layout of the development. The middle photo is the view from outside of the site facing eastwards, so the 3 properties on the eastern side of the site, and the bottom photo is the view from the south looking northwards towards the town. The views from within the site. The top photo shows the view from within the site looking northwards towards the town. The middle one shows the view from within the site looking southwards towards the Rainsbrook Valley. And the bottom photo shows the view of the properties looking eastwards from within the site. And you can see the proposed designs of each of the dwellings. So in terms of consultation responses, no objections were received from technical consultees subject to conditions and financial contributions where necessary. Archaeology offered no objections subject to condition. The council's arboricultural officer offered no objections subject to conditions. Ecology, no objections subject to conditions and a monitoring contribution. Work services within the council offered no objection. The fire authority offered no objection subject to condition. Public rights of way offered no objection. Highways, no objection subject to conditions and the request for a Section 106 contribution. County infrastructure, again, no objection subject to condition and the request for a financial contribution. The local lead flood authority, no objection subject to conditions. Severn Trent, no objection. And the viability consultants recommended a financial contribution in lieu of affordable housing. In terms of third-party comments, the following points were raised: overlooking and amenity concerns resulting from the development, highway concerns related to traffic and congestion, vehicle emissions and pedestrian safety. The vehicle access is located on the brow of a hill. Development is out of character with the area. The impact on the Rainsbrook Valley, archaeological potential of the site. The proposal creates an unacceptable high density overdevelopment of the site, and the development is located in an area with rural qualities. So now moving to the assessment of the scheme. With regards to the principle of development, as per local plan policy GP2, the whole of the application site is within the settlement boundary of Rugby. As mentioned, there's also permission for 5 dwellings on part of the application site, which was allowed at appeal. However, should this application be approved, then it would supersede this previous permission and develop a larger section of the site. At the time in which the officer report was published, the council could demonstrate a 4.5-year supply of housing. This has now been updated as per the addendum to 4.42 years. Therefore, footnote 8, paragraph 11 of the MPPF states that where a local planning authority cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, then the most important policies for determining the application, which involves provision of housing, are considered to be out of date. Therefore, paragraph 11D of the MPPF tilted balance is triggered. Paragraph 11D states that where there are no relevant development policies or the policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date, granting permission unless point 11DI or 11DII are triggered. There are no area or assets referenced within 11DI for consideration within this application. Turning to 11DII, this states that permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the MPPF taken as a whole. The planning balance will set out this conclusion. Therefore, regarding the principle of development, housing on this site is within a sustainable location and is considered acceptable subject to a detailed assessment and all other planning matters being satisfactorily addressed. So moving to character design and layouts, local plan policy SDC1 states that development will only be supported where the proposals are of scale, density and design that responds to the character of the areas in which they are situated. The scheme provides a linear format of development which does run contrary to the prevailing layout of Barbie Lane, however provides a similar layout to that experienced at the adjacent Westwood Road. The proposed layout provides an average side separation between plots of 3 to 4 metres. Fellows Way, which sits to the northeast, the distance between properties on that site is lower than that proposed in this scheme. The proposal provides 11 detached dwellings, all with a modern aesthetic. A mix of face and brickwork and elements of dark cladding are proposed across the site as shown in the previous slides. Therefore, in conclusion on this matter, the density, scale, layout and modern design of the proposal is acceptable within the locality and at a density suitable for the application site, and therefore in accordance with local plan policy SDC1 and section 12 of the MPPF. So an important aspect of the assessment is the impact on the Rainsbrook Valley. The application site is located within character zone 17J, which is shown in orange on the aerial image at the bottom of the screen. The application site is outlined in red in the northwestern corner of this land parcel. This area of land 17J is categorised as having high medium sensitivity and is stated that the landscape and or visual characteristics of this area are vulnerable to change. Supplementary guidance states that there's scope for some development in this parcel, providing that the existing landscape structure of hedgerows and trees are retained and enhanced to ensure new development is not visually obtrusive to an unacceptable level. As mentioned, the site is subject to a previous application which was refused by the council and later allowed at appeal. The findings of this appeal decision are a material consideration on this part within this aspect of the assessment. The appeal noted that the site is largely open, but its appearance limits its contribution to the wider valley landscape. It stated that proposed development within the site would not encroach into the surrounding fields and countryside and will be well contained within the settlement boundary of the town. However, of course, this application before you tonight must be considered on its own merits with respect to its impact to the surrounding landscape owing to the additional built form proposed from the previous approval. When assessing this scheme within the site, dwellings are now proposed on the southern boundary, creating a greater impact. However, this harm will be viewed against the edge of the town, and the landscaping proposed on the southern boundary and eastern boundaries will screen the development to an acceptable level and be well contained within the site. This is shown on the photographs at the bottom of the slide, with the eastern elevation of the site having substantial screening and the southern elevation having substantial screening for 3 of the plots, with 2, however, remaining fairly open. However, it was considered that the proposal accords with local plan policy NE3. So turning to highways considerations, paragraph 116 of the NPPF states that development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there will be an unacceptable impact on highway safety. Local plan policy D2 also states that planning permission will only be granted for development which incorporates satisfactory parking facilities. The proposed scheme provides the required parking spaces per property. Objections have been received from third-party consultees in relation to the impact on existing traffic congestion issues in the area and the nature of Barbie Lane with regards to cumulative development. The visibility point at the access with the public highway of Barbie Lane is consistent with that considered acceptable for the previous application on the site. Highways have offered no objection on this part. The proposal also includes the provision of a pedestrian crossing on Barbie Lane requested by the Highway Authority, which will allow safe access for pedestrians via foot to gain access to the western side of Barbie Lane from the site. No concerns were raised by the Highways Authority with regards to additional trip generation and vehicle movements resulting from the scheme. So in conclusion, they offered a stance of no objection. Turning to neighbouring amenity, again, local plan policy SDC1 states that development will ensure that living conditions of existing and future neighbouring occupiers are safeguarded. In relation to neighbouring residential amenity, the site is bordered to the north and northeast by residential properties. The proposed dwellings in this scheme are all of appropriate size and scale within the area and are also not considered to be unduly overbearing on existing properties to an unacceptable level. Windows proposed which directly face the properties in the surrounding area have been conditioned in the draft decision notice to be obscure glazed. In relation to any disruption resulting from the construction of the scheme, if approved, it is considered that noise and any other pollution can be controlled via condition through the submission of a construction management plan. On this basis, the scheme complies with local plan policy SDC1. Turning to biodiversity, the application, as it is a major scheme, is required to provide 10% net gain for biodiversity in line with government legislation. The submitted DEFRA shows a habitat area gain of 10.47% and a hedgerow unit gain of 28.55%. The proposed habitat creation shows a gain greater than the 10% and complies with the requirements of local plan policy NE1 and government legislation. Monitoring by the LPA of the proposed net gain on site over a 30-year period will be secured by Section 106 monitoring contributions. The potential impact on species can be mitigated through the use of planning conditions as confirmed by WCC Ecology. In conclusion, the county ecologists have assessed the application and provided a stance of no objection. Turning to flood risk, the site falls within flood zone 1 with low risk. A flood risk assessment was submitted in support of the application. The local lead flood authority reviewed the submitted information and overall drainage strategy, and based on the information submitted, held a stance of no objection subject to conditions. Condition 10 in the draft decision notice will ensure that development is built in accordance with the approved flood risk assessment and drainage strategy and mitigation measures outlined in submitted documents. Subject to the inclusion of the requested conditions by this consultee, the proposal is acceptable and complies with local plan policy SDC5 and SDC6. With regards to pollution, Environmental Health have provided a stance of no objection to the scheme subject to condition in relation to the air quality impacts of the development. Environmental Health have also assessed the information submitted in support of the application and the current and historic uses of the site and indicated that the land is subject to a degree of contamination. A remediation strategy will be required prior to material being removed and a verification plan provided to demonstrate completion of the works. This will be secured by condition should approval be granted. Following Environmental Health's conclusion, they have a stance of no objection to the development subject to conditions and informative notes. Owing to the scale of the proposal, under Local Plan Policy H2, affordable housing provision should be provided for the development either on or off-site. Within the application submission, the applicant put a case forward stating that providing the required affordable housing under Local Plan Policy H2 would make the scheme unviable. This was scrutinised by an independent viability consultant on behalf of the council, and the conclusions were that it was accepted that a reduced sum of £42,500 is paid through Section 106 contributions towards affordable housing provision in the borough to mitigate the impact and still ensure that the scheme is viable for the applicant. With regards to Local Plan Policy SDC4, the scheme will provide electric vehicle charging points, spaces for cycle storage and air source heat pump provisions for the dwellings. The scheme has demonstrated how energy efficiency has been incorporated within the development and therefore the scheme complies with SDC4. With regards to community infrastructure levy, as the proposals include 11 residential dwellings, this constitutes chargeable development. Based on the internal floor space proposed, the SIL is likely to be payable at around £125,000. With regards to archaeology, the proposed development lies in an area of significant archaeological potential, approximately 130 metres south of the possible extent of a medieval settlement of Hill Morton. Archaeology did not object to the principle of development, however it was considered that some archaeological work should be required if consent is forthcoming. As a result of this, Condition 6 is included in the draft decision notice relating to a written scheme of investigation for trial trenching, which should be provided to the LPA prior to works commencing on site should approval be granted. On this basis, the application is therefore in accordance with Local Plan Policy SDC3 and Section 16 of the NPPF. Regarding trees and landscape, a site visit inspection was carried out by the Council Trees and Landscape Officer, and a stance of no objection was provided subject to conditions. It was identified that there are no trees on site subject to TPO status. The overall tree loss in order to facilitate the development is considered to be of low value. The primary arboricultural feature of the site is a collection of trees located to the site frontage of Barbie Lane. A minor amount of trees within this group are proposed to be removed in order to accommodate the required visibility display from the site. However, the Council's Trees and Landscape Officer stated that these trees are of low value, and the high quality trees within this group, including an oak tree, a cherry and a redwood tree, are proposed to be retained. It was recommended that should approval be granted, then conditions have been included in the draft decision notice, which includes a finalised arboricultural statement and a tree protection plan in order to ensure that the retained trees are not impacted by the development period. A further condition has also been included for the provision of replacement tree planting to mitigate for the loss across the site and infill gaps in appropriate locations for screening. This will be in the form of a final specification plan of all proposed tree planting across the site. So, turning to the planning balance in conclusion, the Council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, therefore the tilted balance in paragraph 11D of the framework applies. This states that permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. The harm to the Rainsbrook Valley identified in this proposal is afforded moderate weight. The scheme will contribute towards meeting a housing need. This attracts significant weight in the planning balance. The proposed landscaping is considered to provide an acceptable buffer, ensuring that the development is well contained within the site located within the settlement boundary of the town. The site will be heavily influenced by the surrounding built form on the edge of Rugby, including houses along Barbie Lane and in Fellows Way. The potential adverse impacts of the proposed development in relation to archaeological potential, increased traffic flows, air quality, noise, residential amenity, carbon emissions and open space provision have all been considered. Such issues have been appropriately addressed by way of conditional financial contributions where required. These issues are deemed to be acceptable through the use of appropriate mitigation. In conclusion, the identified harm when weighed against the benefits on balance does not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the scheme as per the criteria of 11DII of the NPPF. Therefore, the recommendation is that the application should be approved subject to the conditions and informative set out in the draft decision notice, the completion of a legal agreement to secure the financial necessary financial contributions and or planning obligations. And this is subject to the Chief Officer for Growth and Investment being given delegated authority to make minor amendments to the conditions and form to outline the draft decision notice. And the Chief Officer for Growth and Investment, in consultation with the Planning Committee Chair, being given delegated authority to add, vary or remove any of the financial contributions and or planning obligations outlined in the heads of terms of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all officers and all colleagues for their time this evening. A couple of queries. Can I just be really? Can you please be specific? And again, apologies if I've missed it, but the outline approval under application R210713 for the 5 properties, has that? So that's dated 21, but has it been implemented? Or has it expired? I'm just curious, as we're in that sort of grey area of 4 or 5 years.
So
afterwards.
sorry to interrupt. To my knowledge, no, it hasn't been implemented yet. However, the findings of the appeal decision have obviously formed the basis for the impacts of the development on the site towards the Rainsbrook Valley, which is why it was sort of heavily referenced throughout. However, yeah, to my knowledge, it hasn't been commenced yet.
Again, without trying to be too combative then, but to be specific, to be clear then, if it hasn't been implemented, it does not have permission. It would have lapsed after that period of time. Is that correct?
Yeah, to my knowledge, I don't know if it is extant or if it is still live or not. But you're right, I think it's 3-year period. I don't know the date of the appeal decision when it came out and as to whether we're still in the 3-year period or not.
Okay.
The application reference was 2021, so I'd assume it would probably been, I think it was 2022 when it came to committee, and then the preceding appeal decision would have been following months after that, so we may still be within the 3 years.
Okay.
I don't know to confirm though.
Thank you again. Just for my personal thoughts going forward, I think it would be really helpful to be really specific, because I'm trying to get into the nature of the development, and to some extent whether if it's developable as opposed to it's not is quite relevant to me. If I could ask a question, sorry to sound money orientated this evening, but the affordable housing calculation in particular, I again respectfully deal with these day in, day out, and I'm struggling to get my head around this. At a very simple level, for the number of properties being proposed in, Leafy, Barbie Lane, Rainsbrook Valley, an end sum of 42,500 instinctively feels ludicrous, but trying to be specific about it, trying to understand that there seems to be some ambiguity about the calculation being that it was 187, but we got to the point where the independent consultant, did they broker 42,500, or where did the 42,500 come from? But particularly for me, what's the absolute break-even point about viable or not? Because it's somewhere between 42,500 and 187. And then if adding to that, you could throw in the comment, the query about the contribution to the off-site traffic impact. My reading of the summary seems to be that specifically this development on its own would not drive the negative impact, but it would contribute to. So again, my general experience, that's fine. This developer then contributes something towards it. It seems quite definitive.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, obviously affordable housing calculations came from the independent viability consultant. I don't know right now the threshold for what would make the scheme unviable to the applicant. That was discussions between the applicant and the viability consultant, which was then fed back through to ourselves. I don't know what the threshold would be to make the scheme unviable. I mean, that could be something which could be concluded following any meeting.
Second point, the highways contribution.
Yes, can you repeat the highway question?
It was just my reading of this was that it's understood that there is a contribution to an impact of Barbie Lane, Ashland Road, High Street junction for safe access. So it's recognised that it would contribute to a poor quality situation, but that it seems to have been saying because this development wouldn't tip it over the edge, it therefore doesn't need to contribute at all, as opposed to making a part contribution to a longer term solution.
Yeah, sorry, through you, Chair. So the request was made by County Council Highways as part of an existing plan that they were looking to implement. And you're right, obviously, they requested that a contribution was made in order to facilitate that. However, when assessing the request against the SIL regulations, it wasn't considered necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms in its own right. When you travel, I mean, the site is approximately over 200 metres from the junction in question. And travelling up the western side of Barbie Lane to the junction, there is an existing junction crossing point to continue down, I think, is it High Street or Ashland Road? So it was just considered that, yeah, it wasn't directly necessary to make the development acceptable, and it didn't necessarily mean the development was unacceptable through highway safety because of this not being implemented.
Councillor Jill Simpson-Vince.
Thank you. Couple of things. I wasn't here when the original application went through for 5. So can you show me on that map where the original previous application that went through on appeal, where those,
Yeah,
what that site was?
I'll try and get the... Is that working? Yeah, the laser point. So the existing property number 25 is this one just here. And the outline approval for 5 dwellings were along the northern section of the site here and then across the eastern section here. So essentially, there was no dwellings proposed on the southern boundary here in the outline approval that was gained.
Just for clarification, it was refused by committee, but it was approved on appeal.
And it was the refusal reason was the impact on the Rainsbrook Valley, and yeah, it went to appeal.
Yeah, so we've gone from 5 houses to now on that same piece of land 7, and you refer in the SPD about, or you're referring here about the SPD in terms of footprint. So garden should be the size of the ground floor footprint or dwelling. I mean, yeah, okay, it's an indicative map, but I can see 1, 2, 3 there that don't look like they're necessarily the footprint in the garden. So how critical are we being on this?
Through you, Chair. The outline approval was a smaller site as well, just to make that clear. So the outline approval didn't include the land on the southern boundary. That was still under the ownership of number 25 at the time that was submitted. So the applicant has acquired more space and has acquired an area of the garden area of number 23, which was purchased. So the site area is bigger, which is obviously why they've came forward with more properties. In terms of the guidance, the guidance also states about the depth of the garden being 7 metres to be acceptable, and that was measured and complied on all the properties as well.
I think I've just go with that observation that the previous approval that we, I presume, rejected because of impact on Rainsbrook and we lost an appeal has actually been made worse by the fact that now houses being built on the edge. So we feel as if the impact has increased from the time we last made our own judgment and rejected. Okay, so there's a quandary there whether we would lose on appeal again on exactly the same basis. So that's more an observation. If I can go back to the viability one, the numbers that my fellow councillor gave, I'm not going to, it was just a more general observation that this seemed to be viable with 5 houses, and now we're putting 11 on essentially the same site, and it's not now viable. It doesn't feel right that you're now building 3 bedroom and 8 4-bedroom. It's on the extreme, absolutely on the extreme of what we would want to build. So the question there is, can we, what is the mechanism for us to put this back into a new viability question? Because at the moment I find it unacceptable. Can we take this back and have another viability calculation done?
I mean, yeah, through you, Chair, obviously this was assessed, obviously they submitted their own viability assessment. This has been independently assessed by a viability consultant. I wouldn't think that another viability consultant would necessarily conclude something different. We've obviously already, you know, we've already had that cost of having an independent viability consultant review the work that's been submitted, and obviously that has concluded that it wasn't viable, you know, subject to obviously various criteria that the case officer has explained. Obviously, technically, yes, you could go back out to a different viability consultant, but I wouldn't necessarily know if that would give us any different answer to what we've got. The other point I was going to make was that I've just been looking up on the previous permission granted, it still remains extant. The date of the decision was the 10th of March 2023, and they've got 3 years to submit their reserve matters, so they've got until next March next year to actually submit their reserve matters if they wanted to implement the previous scheme. So obviously that is a consideration.
I think one of the concerns is what was one on appeal was for the development of 5 dwellings. What we now have in front of us is a major application of 10 or more dwellings, i.e. 11, which is double what the original appeal decided. So it's quite a substantive increase on what was originally there.
Thank you, Chair. Just sticking with the affordability theme and the £42,500 suggested by the independent consultant, where does that go? I don't understand where that goes, and does it benefit the ward? Because if we can't have affordable housing and there's a fee for that, does that come back into the local area, or is it in a pot that gets disseminated?
It would go into housing's coffers. Housing may decide that it would like to upgrade some of those defunct garage sites in Paddocks and Hill Morton with a contribution towards that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. To kind of take on the affordable discussion slightly, but not go away from it. Equally, again, it would help for me if you could please explain almost what's happened with the UHCW kind of engagement, because it doesn't make pretty reading, to be candid, as to what has gone on there, whereby the Hospital Trust is asking for something. We've deemed it not being appropriate. This clearly, I'm asking the question, it's not, I assume, the first time UHCW has engaged like this, or is it? What is it about this particular scheme? So to understand the background to that, but I guess just to jump onto the comment from Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Russell, I think the affordability comment or question, I think there does appear to be a void. So in terms of the clarity of what would be the most the council could ask for, and you know, speaking as a developer, it might be appropriate for the council to start rejecting a few of these to send the message that 42,500 isn't appropriate. But if first you could go back to the UHCW comment, please.
Yeah, so regarding that, the wording in the report is standard wording from the local authority on this matter for applications. I believe we accept contributions from the intensive care boards, but in terms of the university hospitals, Coventry, I believe this wording is within the Ramsgarden report as well, and other recent reports that have come to committee. It's a case that the council don't accept that request from that consultee for the reasons as outlined in the report, and that's standard across.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously, as members and those watching will be aware, I called this application in and gave the grounds that had been provided by residents. So that was the basis on which I called in. I've read the report very carefully, and I've listened very carefully to the comments of the officer, and thank you, Sam, for the detailed report. I think you're on an incredibly sticky wicket here, and I've listened to the comments from colleagues, and they reflect a lot of my own views and concerns with this application, where a large number of policies seem to be observed more in the breach than the holding. I think I'll start with what I consider to be the fulcrum issue, and we've had it discussed a little bit, and it's policy NE3, and it's the impact on the Rainsbrook Valley. On the one hand, we have the extant planning permission, which has already been granted at appeal, that says that the harm is acceptable. And then on the other hand, we have an application that is now for twice the number of houses, and significantly, to my mind, now covers the southern boundary of that site. And I think that carries very significant weight. We've had a discussion about policy H2, about affordable housing, and we've sort of skirted around the 5-year housing land supply challenge that we have, which again, through no fault of this council, weighs in favour of this application and against our existing policies, because let us be in no doubt, this is speculative development. It is not allocated as part of the extant local plan, though that may change given what's been consulted on recently. And I fear that what's actually happened here is obviously Rugby as a whole, and Hillmorton in particular with the Halton development site, has allocated significant amounts of land that were up until very recently being delivered at pace, and all of a sudden we've lost our 5-year housing land supply. And unfortunately, because of the way that the 5-year housing land supply is calculated and the fact that it looks backwards at previous deliveries, we've lost the 5-year housing land supply, not because we're not allocating houses, but because developers aren't building them at the moment because of turbulent economic challenges. And I suspect, and this is supposition, I would like to make it very clear, I have no evidence to support this, just a feeling, I suspect that the same things that are weighing against us in terms of the 5-year housing land supply are simultaneously weighing against us in terms of affordable housing, because the developers will argue that the costs have gone up, that what might have been viable under our previous scheme is no longer viable, and they will have produced, have no doubt that the officers have done their due diligence in assessing that and asking it to be independently consulted. But we seem to be in this paradoxical position whereby, because of the specific circumstances we find ourselves in at the moment, it is both impossible to deliver affordable housing, but also very necessary to grant this planning permission because of the tilted balance applies. And just as the final comment on this particular site, I actually had an email in my inbox land today saying that one of the Halton site's parcels was actually now coming forward. So I suspect that will start to pick up again in the near future. I completely sympathise with Councillor Moran's points about University Hospitals, Coventry and Warwickshire. That is a deep frustration. I also find it amusing, given what we were previously discussing, that in SDC4 they haven't actually proposed to put solar panels on this particular development, though it does, I should say for the record, comply with our policies. There were references to the western side of Barbie Lane and the need for a pedestrian crossing. Just so that members are aware, the reason a pedestrian crossing is needed to make this acceptable is because there is no public footpath on the eastern side of Barbie Lane at all. It is not accessible at present, purely on foot. You have to cross the road, which is a relatively narrow road. One of the other concerns that was raised, and I think has been touched on by the officer, is the design of the site, and there's references in the report to it mirroring Barbie Lane, and that's, Westwood Avenue on the other side of Barbie Lane, and that is sort of correct, but one of the features of Barbie Lane and Westwood Road is that there is actually quite a diversity of different styles of housing. There's bungalows, there's lots of different designs. It's quite an attractive street to walk down. I would encourage people to do so, though obviously on the west side. This is a very different type of scheme to what's already there. It is large luxury houses. It's not, to my mind, although it's part of the built grain, I am unconvinced that it is in character with the area. So I understand the reasons and the policy arguments in favour, but I am very unconvinced by this application.
Sorry, the 5-year land supply has a habit of going up and down and up and down. It depends on what's coming through in terms of developed property. I mean, what's the number today? Is it 4.8 or is it 4.2?
Thank you, Chair. So apologies, I didn't mean to jump in. I hesitate to cancel anybody. Don't want to hear you finish, so apologies. I want to kind of, if you want, build on what Councillor Picker said, and that I think, if put simply, it's important to separate the strategic matter of local plans and the case in point of development here. I think in respect of this development here, I think there are many crosses against it that I think is quite clear outweigh the benefit in this particular scheme. I think strategically we're in this position because we're relying on big urban expansions that have those vulnerabilities. I think, notwithstanding that, I think the very simple fact that there is a very entrenched view of the importance of that Rainsbrook Valley in terms of its significance, and the fact that we're working on a site where there is a partial outline approval, albeit not implemented, but the impact is materially doubled, I think is a very significant issue here. And I think that for me is the primary issue. I think second to that, not remotely satisfied with what's being put forward from an affordable housing point of view. And I think the best way that's addressed is by simply saying no.
For Councillor Mann, you're moving refusal.
If I'm happy to, I'm happy also to encourage further debate.
Do we have a seconder? I've got so many hands going up.
I think on the grounds of policy NE3, I think refusal is warranted. So if that's policy NE3 and the impact on character zone 17J as identified in paragraph 11.1 of the officer's report.
Can I just confess that is the sole reason for refusal that's been recommended?
Unless Councillor Moran wants to add affordable housing, though I would recommend against from past experience.
Just a quick reminder for members, putting forward a solid and reliable ground for refusal is better than putting a machine gun full of reasons for refusal. So a good ground is better than a lot of grounds.
No, again, I keep... although this is only my second Rugby Borough Council Planning Committee in this chair, I'm comfortable with the appeal procedures. I think for me it is very clear the impact on the Rainsbrook Valley in this instance. I disagree with 11.1111 in conclusion. The proposed development would not adversely harm the Rainsbrook Valley landscape to an unacceptable level. I think it would. But equally, I do think there is an important point to be made about affordable housing, because I think on the very simple fact that there isn't an absolute clarity, it's a very simple mathematical equation. What is the point of affordability? I'm not interested in what an independent consultant can effectively broker. I want to know the figures, and 42.5 on its own is not significant enough for me.
Councillor Jill Simpson-Vince.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think, we have a policy that says what our affordable housing threshold is. It's very clear. Everyone knows. And, you know, it's very frustrating when developers come in and say, well, we had five, we now want 11, but we still can't do the affordable housing. Well, actually, is it a viable site at that point? You know, it's. I don't know how much more simple we can make it, and then we get negotiated down to £42,000. It's like, no, I think if we can add it in as a reason for refusal, I think we should. And in terms of Rainsbrook Valley, we've been here before as well, and 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we didn't like, and you come back with 11, well, okay, the planning inspector said yes ultimately last time, but this is much bigger and has a much bigger impact. So I will also be voting refusal.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, duly noted. I just checked the policies. Was it solely NE3 you were referring to, Councillor Picker?
So I was solely focusing on NE3 and the character zone of the Rainsbrook Valley and the medium to high sensitivity, and significantly the additional impact on the southern boundary, which wasn't considered in the previous application. My advice to colleagues from previous experience is that viability challenging its appeal is unwise, but if it is the view of committee that we want to challenge on that ground as well, then we can have that conversation.
I mean, our legal officer may want to add, but with their vast experience about challenging viability, obviously it is an accepted, national legislation allows viability to be assessed. It has been independently assessed. Obviously, the members may not agree with the conclusions, and obviously, that's what I'm hearing. But obviously, we are, as professional officers, we have to advise that is our professional view is that that it is reasonable based on the evidence that's been submitted to us. However, I guess our legal officer may be able to give more clarity what's happened at appeal and potentially High Court challenges.
Yeah, I mean, only that the National Planning Policy Guidance sets out in quite a lot of detail what a viability assessment must take into account. So it's got a lot of guidance about benchmark land values, so the value that should be paid for the land, and a reasonable return to a developer. So I don't think it would have been the case that the council's independent viability assessor would have been negotiating with the applicant, or at least that shouldn't happen. He should assess it independently, and the figure that he comes up with should be the most that can be contributed to the affordable housing without making the development unviable, taking into account a reasonable return and incentive to develop. So I suppose if you were to challenge it on appeal, what the inspector would be looking at is whether that viability assessment had been carried out in accordance with the National Planning Policy Guidance, and whether it was robust. So if you were to say that wasn't robust, I suppose you'd need another witness, because the council's expert who's assessed it so far has said it is, that's his view. So you'd need to call evidence that said that that wasn't a robust assessment. So that's all I'd say about viability.
Councillor Moran.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, John, for that. Again, trying to be really specific here, because again, appreciate the process, at length. I think what would help in this particular instance, there is an ambiguity, if I use that word, regarding where the number 42,500 has come from, because it's stated that the figure requested is 187, but it doesn't set out definitively is 42,500 the figure that tips the balance. So on this instance, I think it's important, and I don't think this, again, respectfully, this committee should be thinking about future legal steps. It's got to make the right decision now. And I think for me, it is important to send out that message about affordable housing. But I think here, we're not in possession of all the facts. So, for example, there was discussion of, you just said then, regarding the extent to which the existing land value has been included within that calculation for the financial deficit. Hypothetically, does that formula assume that the 5 dwelling plot has got planning permission, even though it isn't implemented? I'm not privy to all the figures here, but for me, I think it's important to keep affordable housing on the debate. And I think here, understanding we don't have enough information So the wording around the affordable housing challenge could be more nuanced. But I think this application ultimately lives and dies on its first point. So I think it doesn't harm to have two, because I think the first one is very robust.
If the members should go for refusal, then all that becomes academic, doesn't it?
Well, obviously, if an application is refused, shall we say, on the first point that was raised on the impact of Ainsworth Valley, then if the applicant chose to appeal, obviously the inspector would look primarily at the reason for refusal, but obviously they would also have to consider other matters as well. But they will be primarily focusing on the reason for refusal. If affordable housing wasn't a reason for refusal, then they wouldn't be looking at, and that in theory should not be tested at appeal. But it would be that the inspector would, they'd still have to consider, because they're obviously issuing a decision, that the inspector is then happy that all the contributions that are put forward are still compliant. Obviously, they would have the officer recommendation, but it's not necessarily to say they are closed. They would then be reviewed again by the inspector. I mean, in terms of affordable housing, not referring back to a previous decision we've made tonight, but a review mechanism in legal agreements is a common element with regard to affordable housing. So if the figures do change during the process, and say, for example, that contribution would then need to then potentially go up, there is a review mechanism that is in there. But I appreciate that, saying on the basis if this scheme was actually approved.
Councillor Gillies.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think, for the record, I think we ought to put in the minutes the quality of the debate on this one. I've listened with great intent on the reasoning behind this proposal for refusal, which I agree. I think is excellent. Thank you all.
So at the moment, what we have in...
Yeah, the only final point I was just going to make was just members do need to be clear about whether the reason for refusal relates to them not being convinced by the accuracy, or there's insufficient information in the assessment, or that they're content with the assessment, but they've decided that actually we've considered viability and we've decided that the need for affordable housing outweighs that, and we're refusing it anyway. So I think there's a distinction there between those two reasons. Are you actually questioning the independent assessor's conclusions on viability, not convinced by that? Or is it that even if it's not viable, you think the need for affordable housing outweighs any viability concerns, and so you're refusing on that basis?
Councillor Sam Edwards.
I also thought that Councillor Pickard mentioned it being out of character. Was that not a separate issue?
I think you talked about the linear character, didn't you? Which might have been separate to the NE3 point.
I think we should be careful of not muddying the water too much, because we do need to make a decision as a committee tonight. Go off. Councillor Luke Russell.
Thank you, Chair. So I also initially started to call this one into committee as well, but Councillor Picker beat me to the punch on that one. But I thought it was important that it did come to committee. I understand the arguments, obviously, for approval. I recognise the shortfall on housing land supply, and I also understand that we do have a extant approval in place that was on appeal. But, contrary to that, we talked about the affordable housing. I don't like it. The fact that it's not viable, and an off-site payment that goes into a coffer somewhere doesn't necessarily benefit Hill Morton specifically. I understand the reason behind that. I do have concerns about the highway safety. That junction is awful at the best of times. Recognise that there is a Section 106 contribution in there to improve that, but my concerns still stand. However, the main issue for me, echoing what Councillor Picker said, is the impact on the Rainsbrook Valley. I think in the report it's shown as high medium sensitivity and moderate weight, therefore against. I don't believe that is, I think that's underplayed. Taking on board the fact that the southern aspect of it is now a lot different to what it was in the pre-approved, appealed decision. So I will be seconding refusal based on policy NE3 and the impact of the Rainsbrook Valley.
I thought Councillor Mann had already seconded it.
I think it was Councillor.
Right.
Yeah, well, my problem is I'm confused now, okay? Right, so I'd like clarity on what we're voting for.
Yeah.
And if I possibly could put down, I think there are two things here. One is that we will vote on what was proposed by Councillor Picker, okay? And we're clear of what that was. That was on the impact on Rainsbrook Valley, primarily, and really maybe solely, okay? That's the sole issue. Or the other option is we do that plus the thing about viability and social housing, etc. And that, as I understood, is a choice that we're all sounding like we're going to refuse, but it's what conditions we're refusing on.
I suggested first I want to move to reject based on the impact on the Rainsbrook Valley, and I'm happy to agree the specific wording. I do think it's important to put affordable housing down as an additional reason. So I'd like to propose that those are both put forward.
Are you happy to accept that, Councillor Picker?
So we are citing
Just a clarification, we're not refusing with the independent assessors calculations, because I see risk in doing that. Yeah.
No, so it's lack of information? Is that lack of information, I think was the...
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Could it...
And it doesn't meet.
Yeah, I think that might be the better, just because if you say you're not agreeing with your own assessment, that may lead to an adverse costs decision.
That's a fair point.
Vote on refusal, NE3 and lack of affordable housing provision.
Yeah.
Noted. Chair, I'll move that.
Delegated decisions.
Noted.
Thank you.